The wind sliced through the Montana territory like a knife, dragging with it the bite of winter and the sting of dust. Red Rock Station sat lonely in the valley, the platform dry and splintered under the weight of silence. Then she appeared. She staggered off the train, one step at a time, like each movement cost her more than she had left to give. Her boots were scuffed and barely held together. Her dress hung in tatters at the hem, dirt-caked and stiff with old sweat. One eye was swollen nearly shut. Her lower lip was split. Her skin, pale beneath streaks of dried blood and grime, looked like it hadn't known rest in weeks. But it was her hands that made the station master take a step back. They trembled wild, uncontrollable, as if she'd outrun something that still clung to her skin. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. Her knees simply gave out. She collapsed face first onto the cracked wooden platform, and for a second, no one moved. Then someone did. A man pushed off the rail he'd been leaning on. He crossed the space in 2 long strides. Tall, broad-shouldered, dusty from the trail, he didn't ask questions. He dropped to one knee beside her, slid an arm beneath her back, and lifted her as if she weighed nothing. Her head lolled against his chest. Her breathing was shallow, fluttering, too light, too close to not being there at all. "Where's the doctor?" His voice cut through the frozen air. The station master blinked, jolted. "Town's 4 miles out. Closest dock's there. I'll take her." He didn't wait for agreement. He didn't look for permission. He just carried her to his buckskin mare, settled her gently in front of the saddle, and swung up behind her. One arm braced her body, careful not to press against the bruises blooming up her arms. She stirred once, a flinch, barely a breath. "Easy," he said, his voice softer than the wind. "You're safe now." She looked at him, just for a second, just long enough to register that she was no longer alone. Then she faded again, somewhere deep inside whatever place had helped her survive this long. They rode hard into the wind. Her body leaned against his, a wraith in dirt and torn fabric. She didn't speak. She barely moved. But she was breathing, and that was enough for now. They reached the clinic just before dusk. The doctor took one look and waved them inside without a word. "Lay her down. I'll get what I need." He did. Then he stepped back but didn't leave. He stood with arms crossed, jaw tight, boots planted like he might have to fight something off. Maybe he already had. Hours passed. The doctor worked in silence. Bandages, broth, hot water, and then finally, a single sentence. "She'll live, but she needs time, food, rest. Whatever she's been through, it didn't leave her easy." The man didn't ask what had happened to her. Not then. He stayed that night, in the chair beside her cot. Eyes sharp under the brim of his hat, he watched the rise and fall of her chest like it mattered more than anything else. He didn't know her name, didn't know her story, but something about the way she felt like she'd been holding the weight of a world only she could see had carved itself into him. She hadn't come to Red Rock. She had escaped something far darker. And that, more than anything, was what made him stay. Have you ever seen someone who, with just one look, told you they'd survived hell? If you haven't, keep watching, because this story isn't about where she landed. It's about what she ran from and what it takes to start again. Morning light crept through the slats in the shutters, pale and hesitant. The room was still, except for the quiet creak of wood and the soft rasp of breath from the cot. Calla opened her eyes slowly. Her body ached in places she hadn't known could hurt. Her lips were cracked, her face stiff with dried blood, but she was awake, and he was there. The man from the station still in the same chair, his hat resting on his knee, a tin cup of something warm held loosely in his hands. He didn't speak right away, just watched her with the kind of stillness that didn't press. "Morning," he said eventually. Her fingers curled into the blanket. Her body tensed. "I'm not going to hurt you," he added gently. "You fainted at the station. I brought you here." Her eyes flicked to the door, then to the window. Measuring distance, calculating escape. "My name's Yates, Yates O'Connor. I run a cattle outfit west of town." She didn't answer. "You got a name?" There was a pause. Then, rough and cracked from disuse, she said, "Calla." He nodded once, like that was enough. "You hungry, Calla?" Her eyes filled with something unspoken. She nodded. Then let's get you fed. Over the next few days, Calla didn't say much. She stayed in the cot, wrapped in a silence thicker than any blanket. But every morning, Yates came back, sometimes with bread and soup, sometimes with a folded cloth full of dried apples or stew wrapped in tin. He didn't ask questions. He didn't hover. He just sat, nearby but not close, his presence steady like the hills outside the window. She watched him sometimes, when she thought he wouldn't notice, the way his fingers curled around the edge of the chair, the quiet set of his jaw, the way he never looked away too long, but never stared either. On the 5th day, something shifted. She was sitting up now, thinner but stronger, the color just beginning to return to her cheeks. She held the cup of broth with 2 hands, sipping slowly when she spoke. I had 2 children. Her voice was quiet, barely more than breath. Willa and Weston, they're 5 and 7. Yates didn't move, didn't speak. A man took them, said I wasn't fit, said he had money, and I had nothing. Her fingers tightened around the cup. He used to be my husband. He beat me until I couldn't see straight, told the court I was unstable, and they believed him. She set the cup down. Her hands trembled again, but not from cold. I tried to run, with the kids. He found me. I barely made it onto the train. Her voice cracked on that last word. Yates's hands balled into fists, but his voice stayed steady. Did you tell the sheriff? She shook her head. He has money, friends. People don't believe women like me. He was silent for a long moment. You're not alone anymore, Calla. She blinked fast, like she was trying to keep the words from sinking too deep. Why do you care? She asked. He stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the hills. Because I saw the way you dropped at that station, like you'd carried the whole world on your back. No one should have to live like that. She didn't speak, not for a long time. Then, her voice barely audible, she said, I don't want to hide anymore. He turned to face her. Then don't. Her chin trembled. What if he finds me again? Let him try. And in the quiet that followed, something fragile but real took root between them. Not love, not yet, but something that could become it, if given time. She didn't know it yet, but this was the moment her story began to shift, the moment survival turned into healing. And Yates quiet, steady Yates was, already holding the match that would keep her fire alive. This isn't a story about rescue. It's about what happens when someone simply refuses to walk away. If you've stayed with Calla this far, keep watching. The hardest parts are behind her. But the real fight, the one for her children, her name, her future, that's just beginning. The mornings came earlier now, not because the sun rose any faster, but because Calla was up before it. She had taken to walking the quiet trails behind town, following the bend of the river, where the cottonwoods arched and the stones clicked softly beneath the water. Some days she brought bread and cheese in a borrowed satchel. Other days she just walked, letting the wind press gently against her skin. The silence out there wasn't empty. It was full of space, full of breath, full of the pieces of herself she was beginning to gather again. Back in town, she had started working above the feed store, sweeping, scrubbing, folding sacks, whatever needed doing. In exchange, she had a small room and a cot to sleep on. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Yates still came by, though she had never asked him to. He brought apples, once a book, sometimes nothing at all. He just showed up, Saturday with her, said little, but stayed. One afternoon, as she stepped out back to toss-wash water, she found him standing there rubbing his shoulder. You hurt yourself? She asked. Tripped over a damn cat behind the stable, he said, grimacing. She laughed, not just a smile, but a laugh that slipped past her teeth before she could stop it. You're not as tough as you look, she told him. He grinned. And you're tougher than you think. She looked at him then. Really looked. He wasn't a man of many words, but there was something in the way he saw her. Not like she was broken, not like she was dangerous, just seen. That evening, as the sky turned soft and gold, she asked him, Why are you still here? Yates leaned against the porch rail beside her, arms crossed. Because I want to be. She looked down at her hands. You don't even know me. I know enough. She didn't pull away when his fingers brushed hers. She never collapsed again, but each time she stumbled, Yates was already there. One morning, she walked past the schoolhouse and found the teacher, Miss Cartwright, standing outside, trying to corral a group of younger children. The older ones had gone off to the fields, the little ones didn't know where to go. Calla knelt beside one boy who had fallen in the dirt. She brushed off his knees and handed him a smooth rock she'd picked up earlier by the creek. He blinked at her, then nodded solemnly. By the end of that day, Miss Cartwright had offered her a part-time position, helping, watching, listening. "I don't know anything about teaching," Calla said. "You know how to listen. That's more than most." She said yes. 2 days later, she found a small ribbon left on her chair. Soft blue, the kind she used to braid into Willa's hair. That night, while shelling peas behind the livery with Yates, she held it up. "She used to wear ribbons like this," she said quietly. "Willa, blue was her favorite." Yates didn't reply. He just passed her another handful of pods. She hesitated, then added, "I wrote the court, in Kansas City. Used a name they won't recognize. You think they'll answer? I don't know. But if I don't ask, they never will." Later, he brought her a folded map. "This is the county line, and this is where his land sits. If it's still the same." She traced the line with her finger. "You've been there? Drove cattle through years ago. Big house. White. 2 gables. That's it." He watched her quietly, then said, "You'll need a place to stay when you go. You won't sleep under his roof." She looked up at him. "You already thought this through. I don't like leaving things to chance." She closed the ledger in her lap. "You always that way? I've seen what happens when people aren't big." In the quiet that followed, she nodded once. She was done running, done hiding. She didn't know how this would end. But for the first time in a long time, she was ready to face what came next. If you've ever thought you weren't strong enough to turn around and face what you left behind, look at Calla. She was once that person, and now she's walking back into the storm, not because she isn't afraid, but because she knows what's worth fighting for. They left at first light. The sky was still deep with the last breath of night, stars fading behind a soft layer of cloud as Calla swung into the saddle. Her coat was buttoned high. Her hands were gloved, but tight around the reins. Yates sat steady beside her, his mare already restless beneath him. "You ready?" he asked. Calla gave a single nod. No words. None needed. They rode east, the sun climbing behind them, casting long shadows that stretched like threads across the brittle prairie. The land opened wide, silent, but not still. Wind pushed against their backs, moving them forward like a breath held too long. They passed into the low country by midday, cottonwoods swaying over thin streams, deer moving like ghosts between the brush. They said little the first day. The road was hard, and the silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of all the things they didn't need to name. By the second night, they made camp near a shallow ravine, stones piled around a low fire. Calla sat with her back to the wind, legs crossed, a tin plate resting on her knees. Yates tore a strip of jerky and passed her a biscuit. "I thought I'd feel more afraid," she said after a while, her eyes on the fire. "Why don't you?" "Because I'm not alone this time." He didn't answer right away, just shifted closer to the flames, arms crossed on his knees. She leaned back against her saddlebag, watching the sparks lift into the night. "What made you stay in Montana?" she asked. "You ever think about leaving?" "I did. Once. After my father passed. Thought I might head south. San Antonio, maybe. But Ma needed me. Then the herd grew, and the land got into my bones." "You still have family there?" "Just my mother. She remarried. Lives up north now with my aunt. Says she's tired of seeing the same sun rise over the same hills." Calla smiled faintly. "I never had much of a place. Not one that felt like mine. Just rooms I passed through." "You'll have one." She turned to him. "You mean that?" "I wouldn't say it if I didn't." The wind shifted, bringing the scent of dry mesquite and the faint sound of coyotes on the ridge. She watched him for a long moment, then reached into her saddlebag and pulled out a small cloth. Inside was a ribbon, faded, once pink, now almost white. "She wore this the day I took them," she said. "Willa. Dropped it in the wagon. I didn't even know I'd kept it." Yates didn't speak. He unfolded the ribbon carefully, ran a thumb across the edge, then folded it again with the same care and handed it back. "You'll put it in her hair again." Calla tucked it away. Her throat tightened. They reached Kansas City 2 days later. The town had grown since she'd last seen it. More wagons, more buildings. The clang of the rail yards loud in the distance. She kept her coat buttoned and her hat pulled low, eyes fixed forward. They took a room near the courthouse. 2 cots, 1 basin, no questions asked. Calla stood by the window as Yates unpacked their bags. "The hearing's in the morning," she said. "I don't want you in the room. Not unless they ask." "I know. It's not because I don't want you there." He paused, then looked up. "You already decided. I won't argue with that." She gave a short breath, almost a laugh. "I thought if I ever came back I'd feel like I was drowning, but I don't. I feel ready." "You've already done the hardest part," he said. "What's that?" "Living through it." The next morning, she wore the same riding skirt, tied her hair back tight. She didn't speak as they walked to the courthouse, only squared her shoulders and kept her steps firm. Yates waited outside. When the doors finally opened, she stepped into the sunlight and walked down the steps, paper clutched in one hand. "They'll reopen the petition," she said, "but I have to prove I can support them, that I have a home, stability. They want a statement from the person I live with." "You'll have it." She looked at him. "Careful. It means tying your name to mine. In writing. I don't care about names. They'll send someone to verify everything. Then we'd better be home before fall." She held the paper tight. "Home," she repeated softly. He stepped closer. "That place I told you about, near the creek. It needs someone who knows how to start again." She gave a slow smile. "Maybe that someone is me." And for the first time since they left Montana, she didn't feel like she was heading into battle. She felt like she was heading towards something she could build. The road back would be long, but the hardest part was over. And this time, she wasn't riding alone. The sky above the rail yard was heavy with gray. Clouds pressed low, as if holding their breath with her. Calla stood beside Yates, gloves clutched in one hand, the other wrapped tightly around her ribs. The platform was quiet except for the distant sound of the train whistle, growing closer with every second. She hadn't slept the night before. Every creak of the floorboards had pulled her eyes open. Every shift of wind outside the window made her heart thump like a drum in her chest. But now, standing there, she felt oddly still. The train screeched in, iron grinding against iron. Steam hissed into the air. The doors clanged, and then they opened. A woman stepped down first. Gray cloak, lined face, calm hands. The matron. Behind her were 2 small figures, a girl and a boy. Calla didn't move. The girl's dress was patched at the hem. Her hair, once long and ribboned, had been cropped short. She held her brother's hand tightly, chin tucked to her chest. Then, Willa lifted her head. Her eyes met Calla's. One breath, then another. "Ma," Willa said. Calla dropped the gloves. Her knees hit the platform before she even realized she had moved. Arms open, mouth trembling. Willa ran first. Her face crumpled, tears spilling freely as she threw herself into her mother's arms. Weston followed a heartbeat later, stumbling, then crashing into the circle of warmth and fabric and breath that Calla wrapped around them both. She held them, like she would never let go again. Her voice broke on the words she whispered over and over. "I'm here. I'm here. I'm here." Yates didn't move, just tipped his hat toward the matron in silent thanks. She gave a small nod, then turned and stepped away, leaving the family there, wrapped in something too deep for language. The wagon ride back was quiet. Willa sat pressed against Calla's side, her head resting on her mother's shoulder. Weston dozed in her lap, one hand curled in the folds of her shawl. Yates drove the team steady, eyes fixed ahead, giving them the moment they needed, without saying a word. When they reached the cabin, Yates lifted Weston gently, carrying him inside. Calla followed with Willa, showing her the stove, the quilt folded neatly on the end of the bed, the corner where the sun hit the floor just right in the afternoon. That night, after the children had been tucked into the small bed, Calla stepped out onto the porch. Yates was already there. He stood with arms loosely crossed, eyes on the sky. The stars were just beginning to show. She stopped in front of him, the lantern light brushing her face. "I don't know how to name what you've given me," she said. He looked at her, lines soft at the corner of his mouth. "Don't name it. Just live it." She reached for his hand. "I want you to stay." He didn't answer right away. "I was hoping you'd say that," he said, voice low. She stepped closer, resting her forehead gently against his. "I don't just want a roof or a bed or a fence that holds. I want you beside me, when I wake, when it's hard, when it's easy." His thumb brushed along her cheek. "Then that's what we'll build." They didn't kiss right away. They just stood there. Two people stitched together by quiet moments and hard truths, wrapped in the kind of stillness that meant everything had changed. And when her lips finally touched his, it wasn't urgent or unsure. It was real, the kind of kiss that stays, the kind that tells you you're home. The first snow came quietly. It dusted the ridgeline in the early morning hours, clinging to the branches like breath held in stillness. The world outside the cabin turned soft and pale, and everything seemed to slow beneath the hush of winter. Calla stood barefoot on the porch, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders, arms encircling her daughter from behind. Willa leaned back into her mother's warmth, watching the sun rise as it painted the snow in a faint gold. The silence between them wasn't awkward or empty. It was full of knowing. Inside, the cabin was alive with the small sounds of a day beginning. Yates stirred the fire, the iron poker clinking against the side of the stove. Weston sat half asleep on a pile of blankets nearby, eyes blinking slowly as the warmth settled into his bones. The scent of cedar and ash mixed with something sweet rising from the pot on the stove. Their home was not grand. The walls were patched. The roof had needed fixing more than once. The floorboards creaked in the corner near the stove. But it was theirs. Every beam, every nail, every shelf and coat hook had been placed with care. Calla had sanded the porch railings herself, arms sore and splinters in her palms. Yates had reinforced the barn door with planks he milled by hand. Even Willa had helped line the pantry shelves with old paper, smoothing the edges until they sat just right. Neighbors had brought what they could. Miss Cartwright sent a stove. Dr. Keller delivered herbs and a quilt that once belonged to his sister. No one asked questions. They simply gave. In the evenings, they sat on the steps and watched the sky darken, cups of hot tea in hand. Some nights were quiet, some filled with stories, but always, there was a steady peace that wrapped around them like a second skin. One afternoon, as the wind whispered through the trees, a letter arrived. Calla stood beneath the porch eaves, the envelope in her hand. Yates stepped down from the ladder, wiping dust and paint from his fingers. "From Kansas?" She nodded and broke the seal. Her eyes scanned the page, slow and steady. Her jaw clenched, then eased. "They ruled in my favor," she said softly. "The children are mine, fully. No more reviews, no more courtrooms." Yates didn't ask if she was ready. He only said, "We'll ride to meet them." But this time, there was no train to greet, no matron to speak to, just a life waiting to be lived. The next days passed in rhythm, chores and lessons, laughter spilling from open windows. Calla kept Willa close, sometimes braiding her hair with the faded ribbon she had once thought lost forever. Weston took to following Yates around the barn, trying to mimic every movement with determined little hands. And every morning, Calla woke to warmth, not just from the fire or the thick quilts, but from something deeper, something that had taken root. One evening, she stood at the edge of the porch, watching clouds roll low over the hills. Behind her, Willa set the table. Weston hummed a tune he had picked up in town. Yates came up beside her and rested a quiet hand on her back. "Looks like snow again," he murmured. She nodded. "I hope it stays a while." "Me too." She turned to him, eyes bright with something unspoken. "You built this with me," she said. "We built it together." She looked out again, the wind brushing soft against her cheek. There was still work to be done, fences to mend, days that would be hard. But for the first time in a long time, she didn't brace herself for what might come. She welcomed it, because this wasn't borrowed. It wasn't promised. It was real. It was hers. The land, the quiet, the love, and she would wake tomorrow with it all still there. If you saw even a piece of yourself in Calla, or know someone walking through the same silence, share this story. Let them know they're not alone. Healing takes time, but it begins with a choice. Thank you for staying with her. Until the end.